I think if you came from a working class area in Glasgow at that point, I think avoiding gang problems was almost impossible. Be very careful what you say to students or your pupils in your class, because you'd have no idea the sort of background that they're coming from. So if you imagine, the worst thing you can do as a human is ostracise yourself from your group, right? So if your group of friends are now involved in gangs, and at 15, who's going to have the courage to stand up and say, do you know what, I'm not going to hang about with you anymore, I'm going to go and be on my own. I was stabbed in the hand, I severed an artery in my hand. I could have bled to death pretty easily. I'm stabbed twice on the back, one punctured my lung. It was a centimetre away from going through the back of my heart. And then on a section of the road called Braidcraft Road in Polmont, I was driving about 70 miles an hour on a 30 mile an hour road. Lost control of the car. As the bend started on the road, I went straight into the tree.
Before we dive into this episode, I want to ask you to hit the subscribe button here on YouTube. It helps keep growing the channel and keep getting fantastic guests like this one. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to have me here, Colin. Thank you.
And I was thinking where to start this one, and I'm going to start with the title of a Facebook post of yours, titled Polmont to Podium, Dafty to Doctor. Yeah. What does that mean?
Well, initially when I was younger, I was getting involved in a lot of trouble. I ended up getting into Polmont Young Offenders Institution. So the dafty to doctor one comes from being what would be considered a dafty in Glasgow, running about getting into trouble. Years later then going on to medical school to become a doctor, and the Polmont to podium was Polmont Young Offenders Institution, taking on the podium, winning one national title at the 100 metres in athletics as well, after having pretty significant leg injuries that I caused myself during a car crash. So that's where the title of that post came from.
I think when you see those transformational things, they're so popular on social media. Yeah. But you were somebody that hadn't spoken about the journey that you'd been on until maybe that post, which was May 2022. We've got to know each other through David, who you've had an amazing conversation with about your story as well. What was it about your story that meant that you maybe didn't share that before that point?
Probably a bit of embarrassment. You know, at that point I was a university graduate from Glasgow University. I kind of disassociated myself with who I was when I was younger, that person who was getting into trouble all the time. So it was something, it's not something you would brag about, you know. It wasn't an accomplishment or anything. So sort of kept that quiet for a long period of time until I wrote that post just over 2 years ago now.
That's really interesting, because I think I'm a big believer in how important our identity is. So for example, you describing yourself as dafty. That's an identity that you want to leave behind and distance yourself from, and the behaviours that come with fulfilling the role of dafty is all the things that I'm sure we'll speak about from your early days. Yeah. Whereas now, if you describe yourself as doctor, somebody that finishes on the podium, these are all positive character traits that you need to act in alignment with in order to feel like that guy.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of forms a part of your identity, but even at that, what I'd done initially, what was wrong in the past, that formed a part of your identity as well, you know. We are a collection of our experiences, positive and negative, you know. So I'm the person I am today. I'm at medical school today because of what I went through, good and bad, when I was younger as well, you know.
I think that's an important realisation as well. That first part was Polmont. Polmont doesn't happen overnight. What were some of the reasons and train tracks that you were on that leads to a destination like that?
I think initially in Glasgow at that period, there was a lot of gang problems. You know, I grew up in a working class area in Glasgow. My friend group at the time were heavily involved in gangs and getting into trouble and fights, and I just followed that path that so many of us did at the time. I think if you came from a working class area in Glasgow at that point, I think avoiding gang problems was almost impossible. So everybody that I knew growing up was connected with it in some way, shape or form. I just happened to get involved in it a wee bit more than probably most did, you know.
To paint the picture for the listener then, where in Glasgow were you growing up and what was life like?
I was in Hillington in the south side. So my mum and dad didn't work. We grew up with pretty poor background, you know. Grew up in, you'd probably say, poverty as well. A lot of my friends grew up in similar situations. You know, we bonded because we were brought up in the same postcode. We became enemies with people who were brought up in the opposite postcode.
It's the territorial nature of like schemes in Glasgow, particularly back then. There's like Hillington versus say Renfrew, for example, in the local area, or like in other areas of Glasgow, it could be like Possil versus Maryhill or something like that. There's an element of, you're not from my postcode, you're not part of my my tribe.
Very animalistic, you know, territorialism. Like, if you're not from my postcode, you're now my enemy. And it's something that humans have done for forever. And you even see it in a microcosm in Glasgow, in schemes in Glasgow.
Yeah, fascinating. So life back then, living in poverty, you mentioned mum and dad didn't work, but I know that you also spent time caring for them as well in terms of their health.
Yeah. So my dad, I'm still a carer for him. He's got Parkinson's disease. My mum had schizophrenia, diabetes, and then ultimately she had cancer as well. So I was a carer for both of them from as early as I can remember. I think it's one of the reasons why I'm now studying to be a neurologist at university as well. That sort of stuff stays with you, you know, watching those sort of experiences when you're younger and seeing the positive impact that doctors have on your immediate family, and thinking that one day potentially I could be in the position to give that support to somebody else like those doctors gave to me when I was growing up as a teenager, you know.
I think that's really interesting, and I'm not going to accuse you of post hoc rationalising, but it's nice to realise how much of a footprint or an imprint these experiences and encounters can have. So, for example, seeing the impact that when the doctor came to see your dad, he was able to calm him down, alleviate his pain, put him into a position where he could maybe move forward and feel good for a period. And you're like, oh, something in your brain is storing that up to think about, maybe that's what we want to do when I'm older.
Exactly. And maybe at the time you don't realise that you're going to do that in a medical capacity, but years later you look back and you fill in the gaps with hindsight and you say, in fact, these moments that happened throughout my childhood set me up to do what I'm doing just now, you know. Even when at the time I probably didn't think that these really bad experiences and stressful experiences that I'm going through was going to set me up to be in a position to be able to handle stress in a medical environment as a doctor in the future. That's
really interesting, isn't it? Like, it gives with one hand but takes with the other in some ways, and it largely becomes what you make it then, rather than necessarily, yes, that could equip you really well, but you might never get round to using it, particularly the path that you were on at different times. That may never have been the case. Yeah,
I think if I stayed on the path that I was on initially as a teenager, it didn't matter how my level of intelligence or the skills I developed looking after my parents, I wouldn't have put them to good use. So I'm only able to put the stress that I dealt with as a teenager to good use now because I was able to change my path as I started to get older, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. What was life like caring for your parents? Are you an only child, Stephen?
No, I've got a brother as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it was difficult, you know. I think when you're 13, 14 and everybody else is enjoying sort of being a child and a teenager and going to school and worrying about their studies and their grades, I'm worried about looking after my parents, you know. I'm maybe missing school. Teachers maybe think I'm missing school because I don't want to be there, not realise I'm being up all night with my mum and dad the night before, and then getting to school at 11 o'clock and asking the teacher for a pencil, and the teacher saying stuff like, you've turned up late and you're now asking for a pencil. And I'm thinking, if you knew what it took for me just to get here, I'm sure you wouldn't have said that, you know. Sometimes I think if you're a teacher watching this as well, be very careful what you say to students or your pupils in your class, because you'd have no idea the sort of background that they're coming from. You don't know what their environment's like back home as well. And maybe them just getting to school is a massive accomplishment in its own. And for you to make them feel even worse about not having a pencil or something as silly as that, that's just going to compound the problem and make it even more likely that they're not going to turn up again tomorrow. Because they're thinking, I'm going through all this, getting to school, and the teacher, the person who's supposed to guide me and help me, is now contributing to what everybody else in the class would do, to essentially be taking the piss out of you, you know?
Of course, and ridicule in front of classmates, particularly at that stage, is really, really challenging. I recently spoke to a guy called Cruz Leeming, who is a English rugby league player, and he was talking about trying to fit in during school, whether it was trying to get the same bag or the same shoes. He was trying to reduce the fact that he was of a different colour of skin. He was trying to reduce the fact that he had an unusual name like Cruz. At school, we just want to blend in and not be noticed. So if you're turning up late, the teacher maybe says you're not prepared or you're not here to work and you're not here to contribute, you're straight away sticking out like a sore thumb. Yeah. Even in an environment where maybe there are potentially more kids that are truant or struggling with education in terms of from that background, but you're still being an outlier amongst that. That's even harder.
There might be half the class in a similar situation, but who's they shining the spotlight on? Me, specifically, you know, so that makes a big difference. And you're going through the most crucial part of your development as a teenager. You're still finding out who you are. You've got all these hormones running through you. You've no idea what's going on. And then you've got the teacher who's, like I said, supposed to be guiding you, just making your situation even worse.
Yeah. What attracted you to the gangs? You said there it would have been hard to avoid it.
I think a sense of protection as well, and your friends are all in that. So if you imagine, the worst thing you can do as a human is ostracize yourself from your group, right? So if your group of friends are now involved in gangs, and at 15, who's going to have the courage to stand up and say, do you know what, I'm not going to hang about you anymore. I'm going to go and be on my own, which was probably even more dangerous at that time, you know. And then to say, oh, your friends that you grew up with are like, I think I'm better than you, I'm just going to step away. You can't do that, you know. It's impossible. I don't know anybody that was able to do that. Even as an adult, you're thinking, would I have the courage now to do that? Potentially, but certainly not as a 14-year-old, you know.
Yeah, what were you getting drawn into then at 14, 15? What were you not able to say no to?
Gang fighting, drinking.
Okay.
Yeah, I had athletics at the time, which would sometimes be an excuse for me not to go out on Fridays or Saturdays.
I was reading about this. You had an element of potential in that space as well.
Yeah, I when I was younger, I was pretty good at athletics. I nearly won a national title when I was 16, so that was something that I had that was positive. But then when I was 17, I stole a car. I was in a pretty bad car crash at the time. I nearly lost my legs. I nearly killed my best friend. He broke his back. I had to be resuscitated myself inside the car twice and then inside the ambulance as well. So for the next 2 years, I couldn't walk, never mind run. So that positive outlet that I had initially with athletics was gone. So I just get dragged into the gang stuff even more than I did initially. So I didn't have the excuse on a Friday night to say, I'm just going to go to the gym, I'm going to go training. My friends know you're not going to the gym, you're on crutches, you've got a big cast on your leg, you're not getting out. So I started drinking more and getting into more and more trouble.
What were those early experiences in the gangs like?
Looking back now with hindsight, they were pretty terrifying. You know, I was stabbed in the hand, I severed an artery in my hand. I could have bled to death pretty easily. I was stabbed twice on the back, one punctured my lung. It was a centimetre away from getting through the back of my heart. The doctor at the hospital said to me that if it was a millimetre to the right, now knowing about anatomy as well, like how lucky I was if that knife went slightly to the right, it would have went through the back of my heart and not the back of my lung, and I wouldn't have made it to the hospital, would have bled to death right there and then.
How were you getting into these sort of situations where that level of violence was happening?
It was surprisingly common in Glasgow. It might sound just now like so out with your own world that you don't really see that,
Steven,
you know.
yeah.
But back then, like, people were getting stabbed almost every week, you know. I think if you look at the statistics in Glasgow back then, stabbings in Glasgow were very common, you know.
Knife capital of Europe.
Knife capital of Europe. And you think of all the places in Europe and you think, well, the worst one for knives is in Glasgow. You know, it's a pretty horrific statistic, and we were right in the heart of all that as well. So getting involved in a fight with some guy having a knife was surprisingly common. It was something that would happen on a weekly basis.
Weekly basis?
Yeah, you would see people fighting, getting stabbed, or carrying knives all the time, you know.
Talk to me about the incident with your hand.
Yeah, so I went to a kebab shop in Renfrew. It was where one of my other friends stayed, but we weren't from Renfrew. He was in Renfrew because he was living with his mum. And we decided to go along to the kebab shop for something to eat, as you do on a Friday when you've had a couple of drinks. But at Glasgow, at that point, if you go in another area at that time, you're setting yourself up for trouble as well. Trouble happened. Two guys came to the door. That's the question that people in Glasgow hear all the time. Where the fuck are you from? Where are you from? We told them where we were from. Why the fuck are you here? This is our area. We got in a big fight. During the fight, one of them tried to stab me in the face. When I put my hand up with a bottle, he'd stabbed my hand with it. I got back to, so you can see the large S on my hand. So when I got back to my friend's house, the blood was literally squirting out of my hand, you know, and I was playing with it like Spider-Man, putting it over the mirror, and it just gives you an insight to where I was as a person back then, the way that I was acting.
It's an element of recklessness.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and bravado, trying to show off in front of your friends. I'd been stabbed, I'd severed an artery, but still I was carrying on. My friend had a wee bit more sense than I did at the time, put an amateur tourniquet on my hand. I went to the hospital, the doctor had seen it, and one of the nurses who was looking at me at the time had also noticed that my pinky on my right hand was hanging off, and I had no idea about this at the time.
What had happened there?
So the same instant with the bottle, he must have hit me on the hand, but obviously with the adrenaline and me being so focused on this injury, I had not paid attention to that until the nurse said to me, by the way, your pinky's hanging off. So when I looked down, my pinky was literally hanging off. So I had to surgically reattach. And when I think back now, it shows you like the power of the brain in terms of pain, right? Because before she mentioned that to me, nothing.
Oblivious of this
Absolutely
injury.
Oblivious. I didn't even know it had happened. As soon as she brought my attention to it, one of the worst pains I've ever had. There's so many nerve endings you get on your hands, so you can imagine the level of pain I felt once she drew attention to it, that my pinky was actually hanging off. But now when I look back at it, it shows you how powerful your brain is in being aware of stuff before you're actually aware of it, if that makes sense.
Energy goes where your focus flows.
Exactly, yeah.
So an incident like this, you go to the hospital, you're managed to get patched up in some shape or form.
Yeah, I still have pretty significant problems with my hand. I can't make a I can't put the middle finger up on my left hand, which was maybe a good thing, right? But yeah, I've still got some nerve damage on this hand and nerve damage on my pinky, and I can't really do much with the pinky either.
So that's a gang-related incident when it seems like you from Hillington are in Renfrew and that's a no-go and it kicks off.
Mm-hmm.
When something like that happens, you're talking about the bravado and being able to handle the pain probably in front of the boys is boosting your status within the group.
Exactly.
How do you move on from something like that? Like, is there any option to escape, or is there any option to just go deeper? What does that look like?
Yeah, I don't think there was, especially not for me, there wasn't an option of escape, because if you think of options of escape that you have, so what do you have? You've one, you can move out of the place, right? Moving out of the place, what do you need? Financial resources, right? Didn't have that, so I couldn't move out. You would probably need to have a friend group in another area, which I didn't have. My friend group was the people that I was hanging around with. So at that time, when I'm looking back, I don't think there was an exit strategy, so to speak, at that particular time. Yeah,
the only thing you've mentioned is with the athletics and the promise you've got, you were able to occasionally say no to the Friday night out, which was probably the peak night for violence or challenge over the weekend when there's been drinking, which is largely a gateway drug to inhibitions lowering and going out maybe looking for the fight as well. But if you're not able to keep that up repeatedly, and something that I've heard you speak about before and I'm quite interested in talking about today is access to clubs and athletics comes with a fiscal cost sometimes, or a time cost to travel and get to somewhere.
Yeah.
And that immediately becomes a barrier, and any barrier in the way can push you back towards this life where you're almost losing your pinky on a Friday night in a kebab shop.
Yeah. So I'm working with a charity just now called Athletics Trust Scotland, and I've done a speech for Scottish Athletics, which is the national governing body for athletics in Scotland, and they brought me in to speak with their club leaders and ask how they can get people from disadvantaged communities involved with athletics and highlight the sort of issues that only somebody from that background can speak about, right? One of those issues was the price of entry into the Emirates Arena in Glasgow, the big indoor track. And I said to one of the guys, and he was completely oblivious to this, I said the £5 entry fee can be a massive barrier from somebody from a working class poor background. That £5 entry might be the difference of that person eating or going to bed hungry, or electricity or gas. So that's something I think that unless you're from that environment, you're not really... There's certain issues that you're only aware of if you've lived that experience. So thankfully Scottish Athletics and Athletics Trust Scotland brought me in to see how I could help bring people from the same backgrounds as me and get them involved with sport.
Yeah, that fiver could be the bus travel or the train to or from, let alone the entry price to the place. So it's adding up the whole time to become challenging. And if asking mum or dad, or just mum or just dad, whatever environment you're in, for that could be a really challenging situation, because they, like you say, that's been used for the dinner at night.
And you might think, like, I don't want to put my mum under that sort of stress, because she knows that the money she's got is she's got a certain amount of money, and that's to look after us, it's for rent, it's for food, etc. She doesn't have any spare to give me a fiver for the entry fee, and you made a good point about the transport as well. So it's not just a fiver to get in. If you're going to the Emirates and you're coming from Hillington, that's 2 buses as well. And if you're doing that 3-4 times a week, that very quickly adds up. And then if you try to get memberships for the clubs, club fees for championships, you know, the cost of it, especially nowadays with the cost of living crisis, that all mounts to the point where it's almost impossible for young people to get involved with sport.
Yeah. How important was it, your athletics? And I guess you said you almost won the national title at 16. When you were maybe in the athletics, could you see yourself getting further away and more distant from the chaos?
Oh, massively. Yeah, my friends that I still have now from athletics were from middle class backgrounds. One thing that athletics does, it eliminates those class barriers, because I was now interacting with people who came from very different upbringings than me, and very quickly realised that they were very similar to me. We had very similar interests and passions, and I've still got some of my best friends just now are from people that I met at athletics as well.
That's so interesting, isn't it? And again, I'm sure there'll be ways of differentiation within the sport, but in terms of like whatever trainers they've got, whatever, but it is quite a level playing field in terms of you turn up and you run. It's not like a golf or a tennis where the racket or the clubs might indicate how wealthy somebody is in the background. It's more a case of, look, we turn up and we run. It's a little bit of a leveler from that perspective.
It's very primitive. It's like, here's a line, here's another line. The first person to get to the second one wins. You know, obviously nowadays, I think with the improvement in technology and footwear and stuff, there's a cost barrier here as well. I think some of the longer middle distance races, some of the shoes are 400 or 500 quid, aren't they?
That's
and
wild.
They design them for 100 miles. After 100 miles, you need to replace them.
I saw this. Somebody was talking about a plate being in their shoes, and they can run a half marathon or two, and then that's that. And
Yeah,
I'm thinking, what an expensive hobby.
Yeah, a carbon fibre plate inside them, so it increases the return every time you hit the ground. You get more return off the shoe. And again, that's putting barriers in place. Like if you're a 14-year-old, right, coming from a working class background, and your competitor's now wearing a shoe that gives him a 5% advantage, even if naturally because you're training you're 3% better, he's now got a 2% advantage because of 500-pound trainers he's putting on his feet, and not because of talent or hard work that he's put in.
Yeah, it's really challenging. I'm really glad you're involved with that charity, because as you say, and it's become a bit of a woke term, but I do agree with it. Like, lived experience really does count, because you can speak from, well, when I was 14, 15, 16, this was my situation, and athletics was a potential escape route, because I was asking you about escaping.
Yeah.
That was available, but it wasn't available as much as it could be. And I guess you mentioned a car crash. I mean, we're going to get into some mad stories, Stephen. That taking away your ability to compete is something that I think about when I hear your story as quite a fundamental time in your life. Yeah,
it was, like I said, it made the gang situation a lot worse. You know, I didn't have that outlet that I would have had, or I did have before the car accident. And again, it kind of highlights the importance of having a positive outlook for young kids as well. And I think sport is something that can give kids that positive outlook. Maybe they're going through a lot of stuff at home, and the only thing positive they have is sport, and they can get a new friend group. You know, sometimes with the experience and that they can get a job from it as well. They can get a completely different friend group, can maybe take away from getting involved with gangs or involved in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me about this car crash then. You still have some pain in your knee from it?
Aye, so I was at my friend Chris's house, and he had a bit of a problem with his neighbour. He got in a fight with his neighbour. His neighbour had left the key inside the car. My friend Chris was trying to smash the window with a big brick. He put it through the back window, which remained on the parcel shelf, and you'll hear in a minute how important that became as well. I got in the car, took the car, drove away, came back round, picked up my friend Chris, my other two friends who were there at the time, had more common sense. They said, I'm not going in the car with Steven.
He didn't jump in me?
No, he didn't have a license.
What age are you at this point?
17, yeah. So he didn't have a license. I was drunk as well, and we just stole a car, so obviously they're not going to get it. Unfortunately, my friend Chris did get in with it, in the car with me. We were driving to my house in Arden, maybe 10-15 minutes away, and then on a section of the road called Braecraft Road in Polk, I was driving about 70 miles an hour on a 30 mile an hour road. Lost control of the car as the bend started on the road. I went straight into the tree. I don't have any recollection of the crash. This is just from what I've been told afterwards. The ambulance came. They had to cut me out of the car. They had to resuscitate me inside the car, resuscitate me again inside the ambulance. And then my next memory is waking up on the operating theatre in the hospital, screaming about the pain I had in my hip. And they must have gave me drugs, because I woke up again in the hospital bed. As you can imagine, pretty dazed, wondering what's going on. I've got this massive pain in my jaw. I'm looking down at my leg. My right leg's in traction. So if anybody knows what that means, if you break your hip, they put your leg in traction. Essentially, the elevator is about 45 degrees off the bed. It's chained to a pole at the roof. There's a pin that goes directly through the bone in your knee. So I'm looking at that thinking, oh, something very serious has happened. However, my left leg, the one that I couldn't feel, was stuck underneath the sheets in the hospital. Now, if you've been in the hospital, you know how tight the nurses put the sheets in, so I couldn't pull the sheet off to look at my foot, and I couldn't feel it either. And as you can imagine, I was very worried about actually losing my leg. And the nurse was walking past me, and I was asking her what had happened. She said, you were in a really bad car crash. I said, do I still have my leg? Obviously, this was my number one concern at the time. She said, oh, you do? I said, do me a favour, could you just peel that sheet off the bottom? I just had to look at my leg. She peeled it off, I could see my leg. That was a relief. I was like, I've not lost my leg. I'm in a pretty bad way, but at least I've still got my leg. My left leg was in a cast, my right leg was in traction. My friend Chris comes to my mind, right? I say, oh, what happened to Chris? And she gives me this look that you only get if something very serious has happened. I says, is he dead? She said, no, he's not dead, but he's broke his back. So I have a slight pause, and then I ask her, is he paralysed? That's the first thing you think when somebody breaks their back. She said, he's not paralysed, but he has to go for an operation tomorrow, and we'll see what happens. And then she just walks away. Just leaves me as a 17-year-old on that bed, literally attached to it with wires. You can imagine the thoughts that are going through my head, you know. I almost killed my friend, I've broke his back, is he going to be paralysed, will I ever walk again? I'm looking at my own legs thinking, will I ever walk again? Will I ever get back to athletics, which was the only thing positive in my life at that particular time as well. So, yeah, if you put the list of top 5 worst moments in my life, that's probably up there.
Of course, and all those different factors, as you say, there's that element of responsibility for putting your friend in that situation as well that weighs heavy on the conscious as you're sitting there thinking about all these other ailments you've got. There's the element of, have I just paralysed one
of my best friends? Yeah, and you're thinking as well, looking back now with hindsight, and even at the time, I was incredibly lucky that I hit a tree. What if I hit a pedestrian?
Oh, of course.
You know, it's with these things that go through your mind years later, how lucky that I was.
Well, it wouldn't have been in a hospital bed. You would eventually ended up in a cell for manslaughter or something.
And it'd be death by dangerous driving, you know, I'd been the jail for killing somebody, and that's on your conscience for the rest of your life. Obviously, doing that to my friends on my conscience for the rest of my life, but killing some innocent person walking down the street, you can imagine how much more serious that could have been. Yeah.
An instance like this, they have ramifications and like a ripple effect down the line. You mentioned already the damage to your hip and your leg means that athletically you're struggling to compete again for a long time.
Yeah, it took me good 2 years of physiotherapy to get back to the point where I was even able to jog and walk properly without a limp. So that was 2 years thinking that maybe it's actually possible that I might never run again. My injuries were that significant that was a real likelihood. And now every time, and it might sound a bit cheesy, but every time I go out for a run, I'm genuinely grateful for the fact I can put on my shoes and go out for a run, because at one point in my life, in fact a few times in my life, that had been took away from me and there was no guarantee I would ever get it back.
Yeah, I think perspective's an important thing, and sometimes when we zoom out, but that's an extreme way to do it. Sometimes when somebody on a podcast recommends zoom out and have perspective, it's about something smaller than that, but you literally could have been incapable of doing that ever again.
One of the biggest joys I get just now, especially for stress relief, going out for a run, that could have been taken away for forever.
Yeah. So as you're recovering from the injuries for your run, I know you were using a lot of painkillers and stuff like that as well.
Tramadol.
What was using something as strong as that like?
It was actually a relief from the pain, to be honest with you. It was one of the only things that would get me to sleep at night as well. The pain would keep you up. You'd wake up 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning and reach to your bedside table, take a couple of tramadol so you could get back to sleep again. And you can imagine that somebody that's came from, I was very healthy growing up, I was always very conscious of my health, and now I'm in a situation where I'm stuck in my bed relying on everybody doing everything for me. I'm relying on tramadol just to get asleep. So that was extremely difficult.
We spoke about the hand incident, we spoke about the car. Things like this are obviously warnings that the lifestyle that you're leading is potentially heading away from competing in athletics, away from any other maybe heighty ambitions or goals that you've got. What does it take to maybe move away from that? Because I guess we've not even spoken about Polmont yet.
So obviously during all these incidents, I was spending spells inside Polmont Young Offenders Institution for gang fighting, obviously the car incident as well, and I was making friends. Again, like to say, it's like a university of crime, you know, you're making friends who are involved in that sort of world as well, so that doesn't help pull you away. If anything, actually pulls you further in, you know.
That's something I always find interesting when we consider like the reoffending rate for criminals and young offenders. It's so high because University of Crime, I mean, that's a horrible title, isn't it? It's the opposite of what we want to achieve. You want to create
should be about rehabilitation.
But you're in an environment where perhaps, and again, some of the things you've been remanded for are terrible, but you're probably surrounded by people that are doing other things that maybe you learn about or get encouraged to get involved in yourself. Yeah, you do, and then you start developing friend groups that are probably not in the place where you'd want to find them. But again, I made some of my best friends ever in Polmont Young Offenders Institution, you know. Some of my best friends in there had committed some pretty serious crimes as well. What was life like inside?
I was kind of just like being with my friends, if it sounds a bit crazy, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I would go there for a couple of months at a time and I would spend time at the gym with my friends.
So it didn't scare you?
Initially it did, yeah. I think anybody that says they went to Polmont or prison and they weren't scared, I think they're lying to you, you know. You've heard all these horror stories about the most violent prison, you know. You go in there, people get slashed, people get stabbed all the time up there, kettles flung in their face, and yeah, you're very apprehensive. I remember the first time on the bus going up there, I think I was 16 years old, and when you're 16 and somebody's 21, it's pretty a significant difference in age. So
both physically and in terms of maybe mental toughness as well.
Yeah, and credibility and power that they would have within the prison if they've been there for the last 5 years, and I've just came literally just off the bus. So yeah, you're very, very apprehensive, and I think before you go, that is a deterrent to you. Once you go there, that deterrent's now gone because it's no longer as bad as you thought it was going to be initially.
It's exposure therapy.
Exactly, yeah.
I've seen behind the curtain, and it's not as bad.
It's
as
not
I
as
thought.
bad as everybody made out, yeah.
Oh, that's actually terrible, though, isn't it?
It is terrible, because now you're thinking the only deterrent I had for staying out of prison is now gone. So it makes it incredibly more difficult not to get involved in gangs and into trouble again, you know?
Yeah. One of the things that I've learned about you is that you were getting in trouble actually within Polmont as well in terms of fighting.
Yeah.
And you got your TV taken away from you.
Aye.
Why was that so important?
Well, I think that was one of the first times. You can imagine, right, to set the background, when I was at home, the chaos at home, looking after my mum and dad, being in an area involved with gangs, I didn't really have a time to just sit down and think where my life was gone. So during my last sentence in Polmont, I got involved in a couple of fights within a week. And then the governor sat me down and said, look, you've been involved in all these fights, I'm going to punish you. I'm going to take your telly.
Was there a lot of fighting within Polmont when you were there?
A lot, yeah, definitely.
Did you feel you had to?
You have to. If you don't, everybody's going to pick on you. Somebody offers you a fight in Polmont and you say no, everybody else is watching you, and then they'll start picking on you to make a name off of you because you know you're a weak link, you know.
And I know it's not maybe a nice question, but you could handle yourself after a lot of experience, I guess.
Oh, I definitely. I was fighting all the time in Polmont as well. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't the best fighter in Polmont, but I was somebody that people knew that he wouldn't back down from a fight, and that carries a lot of social currency within the prison as well. But at the same time, a lot of that didn't even matter because people didn't care if you were willing to fight or not. They were going to fight you anyway, you know. And I remember one funny instant, I had a fight with a guy over somebody farted, right? We were out playing pool. This is how ridiculous it can be. And somebody farted and the guy says, oh, it was him. And that guy said, it wasn't him, it was me, pointed at me. I said, it wasn't me, it was you. And he said, was it I? We're going to the gym, we'll sort it out.
And you said yes.
I said yes, and we went into the gym, we had a fight, and then the staff came, took us back to ourselves, and that was that. But that shows you how easy it is to go from 0 to 100 over something as ridiculous as somebody said you farted.
It is social currency, as you say, and status. Because if you were to turn that down, as you say, you become a target, or you get lower down the hierarchy of the pecking order, so you're going to be picked on more.
Exactly. That's the same thing that happens in the playground. It's the same thing that happens in prisons as well.
But we mentioned you get your TV taken away, and I'm interested as to why that was so important.
So I got my TV taken away, and then I was in my cell on my own 23 hours a day with finally a chance to think about what was going on in my life, where my life was going. At that time, all my friends from Polmont were ending up with life sentences. They were getting murdered. A lot of my friends were getting seriously injured, nearly got murdered in a few instances myself as well. And I was thinking, if I keep doing what I'm doing just now, I'm going to end up in one of those two possibilities as well. You know, I'm going to end up dead or doing a long prison sentence. And I said to myself, that's definitely not what I want to do in life. I need to change, you know. And I knew it was going to be difficult, so I just wrote out all the things I had to do to change. Like we spoke about, moving out of Glasgow, I needed to save up for that. What can I provide to somebody that they would buy? Personal training. That's something I was good at, something I enjoyed. So as soon as I got out of prison, I set up my own personal training business. I worked really hard, saved up money, moved out of Glasgow, and then just slowly started changing everything I was doing initially. To get in trouble, I was now using that motivation I had to become a better person and to change my life as well.
On a much smaller scale, many people can benefit from withdrawing all the stimulus and noise, whether it's a TV, whether it's Netflix, their phone, or a busy, hectic life. But you having that moment or many moments to sit with yourself and maybe consider how on earth you change this path, I find it amazing that that's one of the things that you call out as maybe the crossroads moment to maybe try and escape from what was coming is in terms of death or, God forbid, a huge life sentence for a crime.
Exactly, and it's something I do now. Sometimes I'll just turn my phone off for a couple of hours and just think. You know, I think sometimes there's so much stimulus going on in our lives. We're addicted to our phones. There's so much stuff going on social media. Very rarely do we take a moment just to think about, where is my life just now? Where's it going to be in 5 years? And most importantly, where do you want it to be in 5 years, right? And where do you want your life to be in 5 years? Now, you need to put a plan in place and work backwards so you can get to that point, you know, and just don't stop until you have that.
What were you writing down then? You said, get out of Glasgow, start a personal training business.
Personal training business.
I think you mentioned stopping drinking as well.
Stopping drinking
was one of the
is
things
the big one. Stop hanging about in gangs, you know. And most of them, when I was looking down, it seemed they're doable. This is nothing that was impossible. There's nothing on this list that I couldn't do. I knew it wasn't going to be a go out tomorrow and then it's changed. It's going to take time. It's going to take hard work. But I just worked for years until I got to the point where I knew that this was now a distant memory and my life was on a completely different track.
Yeah, I think, as you say, the personal training business made sense because that was something you'd always had to fall back on the athletics, the performance, probably the physique that comes with it. I actually saw a funny photo from your cell in 2009 and you're absolutely jacked, but that's credibility that maybe allows you to offer that service. But equally, and I was speaking about this with a chap that I know really well today, who he ended up in Barlinnie at 21, and he was saying that when he came out, getting a job was really difficult, and he said actually rightly so, because I've got a terrible record behind me. I'm probably not the right candidate for a lot of businesses, but you fall into that bracket as well, in and out of Polmont up until the age of whatever it was. It's really difficult for you to maybe get a job that's going to pay the money to get out of Hillington to go and live somewhere that maybe gives you some space to get away from the madness. So building your own business is maybe one of the only routes.
It was one of the only routes. Like you said, your friend had a very similar problem. If you look at your CV, or lack thereof, the CV you've got is offences that you've committed. You've just come out of Polmont. An employer rightfully is going to look at it and think, I don't think I can take the risk on you, understandably so. So one of the only things I could do was do it on my own, set up a personal training business as well.
Yeah. When did the education side of things come into things? Because that's one of the ways that I've started to get to know you in terms of this incredible degree pathway you're on now, dafty to doctor.
Yeah.
Like it's transformative. When did that become an area of interest?
I think I was researching about my mum and dad's conditions as well. I also got diagnosed with reactive arthritis in 2011, 2012.
What happened there?
I had food poisoning, and then a couple of weeks later I started to get pains in my joints. I had a pain initially in I think it was my left hip for a couple of days, and then I woke up the next day and it was in my right hip. I thought, that's a bit strange. Usually when you get an injury, it stays in place over a couple of weeks, it gradually gets better, but this one was moving all over my legs, and then over the month it just deteriorated, and I would say to my friends, I don't need to go to the hospital, I know what it is, I've slipped a disc in my back, it's affecting my nerves and my legs, and then I was getting problems with my eyes, I couldn't really see, my vision was getting really blurry, I'd lost so much weight. Eventually my friends just took me into the hospital. All the doctors were doing tests and they had no idea what was going on with me, until one Swedish doctor said to me, have you had any issues over the last month or two? And I said, well, I had food poisoning. But obviously at the time didn't make the link between food poisoning I had a month ago that it cleared up and what was going on suffering with now. And he says, what I think you've got is Reiter syndrome, right? And I was like, what is Reiter syndrome? I didn't know what it was. It's now called reactive arthritis, interestingly enough, because the guy Hans Reiter that discovered it was implicated in Nazi crimes during World War II, so they changed it to...
They took the discovery away from him.
They took it away from my eye, so it's now called reactive arthritis, which is more in line with what it is. It's a type of arthritis that you get after having food poisoning. A couple of weeks later, your immune system will generate a response against its own cells.
And starts attacking...
Stacking its own cells, exactly that, yeah. So I had to go on a drug called methotrexate, which is a pretty serious immune suppressant drug. It's a
cancer drug.
Exactly, yeah. And that completely wiped the floor with me, so I ended up stopping that because I thought, well, I would rather deal with the pain of the arthritis than the fatigue of the methotrexate. So I started researching methods of helping my condition. One of the ones was diet, and I was looking at the pathophysiology of reactive arthritis, and I was thinking, all this stuff is actually really, really interesting. So I started looking at the pathophysiology of Parkinson's disease. I would go to my dad's neurology appointments with him, and I would speak to his neurologist about the pathophysiology of Parkinson's, and he was pretty impressed that I had a pretty good understanding of what was going on at the time. And he thought, have you ever thought about going and doing this yourself, like studying medicine, becoming a neurologist? And I remember at the time it was laughable, thinking, me going to university doing medicine, me going to university, never mind doing medicine, becoming a neurologist was laughable. And then I started thinking, you know what, why not? So I applied for college because I didn't have, you needed, I think it was 5 years to get into medical school, right? So I didn't have them.
Your engagement in education during secondary school was never going to allow for
not at all. So I had to find a background.
You didn't have a stable enough environment to
No, not at all. Even like, if you think about it now, the intelligence I've got just now didn't just appear. It was always there. I just didn't have the environment to be able to nurture that.
That's something I find so interesting, and we're going to talk about all the different things you're doing even alongside your degree, which is, it shows the high levels of capability, but completely stifled. Yeah. Like, completely under the surface. Like, most of your teachers would have been completely shocked if they found out that you were in the position you're in now.
100%. And I'd done that podcast the last time, interestingly enough, one of my teachers' daughter who was at the school reached out to me and said, hi, your old teachers thought this is unbelievable what you're actually doing just now, we'd like to meet up for a coffee. We've not met up for a coffee yet, but hopefully we will in the future. Many people reached out to me and said if there was one person at school I never thought would be studying medicine, it would be you. And what that highlights to me is how many other people have that same potential, whereas teachers are overlooking them in school and thinking, that guy's never going to make anything in their life, do you know?
I guess it makes it easier for them if there's the troublesome child, if they just disregard or they do the best they absolutely can, and your outlets for entertainment and sedation from the challenge of the situation you were in was acting out, so they were just disregarding that.
Yeah, looking for attention. I suppose for them it's probably easier just to say, write that guy off, instead of investing the amount of time that you would need to put that person in a position to be successful. But I always think that how many people just now are going through school who are in behaviour support like I was, who are constantly getting in trouble and suspended, and nobody can see the talent they've got, you know, and sometimes it just needs one.
Because it is hidden.
It is.
Like, as you say, like, it would never have been immediately obvious that you have the intellectual capacity that you have, but it also wasn't cool probably for you to show that.
Yeah, it'd be laughed at.
It'd be laughed at, whereas like something like the languages you're learning, the ambidextrous nature of your writing, which again we will talk about, in school that's not a currency, particularly in the environment you were in, where being within the gang, being able to laugh at the fact your hand's been cut open, or being able to throw it around in the playground and not get pushed around, that was more valuable and more statusful. So what are you going to spend your time doing? That,
stuff
not studying.
Exactly. You would get laughed at for being a geek going to the library after school, you know, and you're thinking, like, if you look at education as one of the ways that you can move through social classes and better yourself, right? And if you're getting laughed at for trying to educate yourself, what chance have you got? If your social currency comes from fighting and slagging people that are going to the library and staying for a couple of hours after school and studying and getting tutors, you know, you're already setting yourself up for failure. That's something I think you have to change. You have to have role models for these young people who are going on to education, you know, and they have to be 14, 15 looking at that as a real route for them. Not like when I was growing up, you want to be the next big gangster or the next big gang leader, you know, looking up to people who are in a similar situation to you, but they're going on to university, they're becoming doctors, they're becoming lawyers, and realising, like, do you know what, if he can do it, he looks like me, talks like me, dresses like me, similar background for me, well, why can't I? You know, that's the hope that people need.
I actually think that should be easier nowadays than ever before because of the internet. Like, what age are you, Stephen?
35.
35. So if we think back to then, I'm 32, so very similar. Our access to social media was non-existent until we were in our 18, 19, 20. Now it's much easier for us to be able to get access to that information and see that. So kids at 13, 14, 15 could see somebody who's vlogged their path to university, the studies they're doing for their exam, what that looks like for their lifestyle. And you see behind the door in terms of like, actually, I'm coming from this socioeconomic class and this background, and these are the hurdles that I've overcome. You can do it too. Like a phrase that we use in the podcast a few times, like stand on the shoulders of giants. Now these are giants in a particular field in terms of somebody that's gone from a really challenging situation to getting to go and study for something they really care about. It's a pathway, as you say, to move through those challenges. I
think that's a good point. I think having social media and the access to so many different people, I think you can. It's more easier, more accessible now to find people that have maybe been on the same path as you previously and turned their life around than it was 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's just it depends on what they end up consuming, because they could consume something totally different.
Exactly. On the flip side of that, there's also more information, or there's probably more role models. I don't know if you use negative role models on the internet as well. It depends what one they're actually looking at, you know.
Yeah, and it's so funny that you mentioned that the doctor, when you were, is it neurologist that your dad was seeing, he's saying to you, oh, you'd be able to do this. And sometimes that validation from somebody that is in a respected field is the maybe nudge in the right direction that you need to pursue it.
Can light that fire inside you, you know. It's somebody actually giving you credit for being smart for the first time in your life, and somebody, like you said, is in a very privileged position. A neurologist saying to you, who's only a couple of years removed from being stuck in Polmont Young Offenders Institution, that you could be a neurologist. This guy who was getting suspended and expelled from every school he went to, you know.
It is crazy, isn't it? So what was your pathway? What were your next steps?
So I went to college. I had to do an access source at college to get into university. I had to go get a degree before I could get into medical school because I didn't have the higher in the GCSE. So I knew it was going to be a long road. It's going to be 10 years study before I become a doctor in 2 years' time. So I went to college. They rejected my application initially at first, and then I applied again the following year. And yeah, they accepted me, got into college for a year, got to Glasgow University, graduated with honours in physiology, and then 2 years after graduating I applied for medical school and thankfully got accepted. I'm now in third year of medical school. Something
I think is worth touching on is you did manage to get your hip and your knee back in a place where you could run again, and you found that outlet within Scottish University sport to express yourself again.
I got back into running, back into sprinting again. And I won a national title in the 100 metres Scottish University Championships, and I remember that day as well and thinking like, well, if I could go back in time and lying on that hospital bed with the car accident, nearly losing my legs, 2 years without walking, And then getting back on my feet, and then 2 years later getting reactive arthritis, been on these immune suppressing drugs and not being able to walk again. And then to think a couple of years after that, I've now won a national title in the 100 meters. It was a massive accomplishment.
How important was that, like, to sit alongside your studies? Because when we've been getting to know each other through David McIntosh and Gordon Belch, you're somebody that's highly capable, but somebody that likes to go all in and pursue something to a really high level. So whether that's studying for the physiology degree at Glasgow Uni alongside trying to run faster than every other student in the country.
Yeah, like you said, I think with everything I'm doing, I want to do it to the best of my ability. I think that's the best mindset people can have. If you're going to do something, I think there's a saying, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. You know, if you're going to do something, give it 100%.
I think you live by that.
Exactly, aye. Because anything else, you're doing yourself a disservice. Because in 20 years' time, you look back and thinking, I achieved this at 90%. What could I have done with 100? And that what if will eat you up potentially for the rest of your life.
Do you think about that often?
All the time, yeah. That's why I give 100% in everything I do. Because I can be satisfied with giving 100% and failing than giving 90% and thinking, what if? That what if will eat you up for the rest of your life. You could be 60 and think, what if I just gave an extra 10%? Or you can be 60 and think, I gave 100% and maybe it turned out well or maybe it didn't.
Yeah, it's really cool. We mentioned languages earlier and I briefly touched on it. During your degree at University of Glasgow, you were also learning Spanish at the same time.
Yeah.
What was pushing that?
I think I was always impressed when I listened to other people speak other languages. I think one thing that almost everybody I've ever spoke to has on their bucket list is to learn another language, and I was no different. But I always thought there's no way I would ever be able to learn another language. But after the first year at Glasgow Uni, I realised that I wasn't as silly as I thought I was. I was actually pretty intelligent. I thought I'm going to spend this time teaching myself Spanish. I'm just going to use the degree, the 4 years at Glasgow Uni, at the side to learn Spanish at the same time. And then over months and years, I just realised that if you can speak one language and you've got discipline and you want to learn another language, it's just a matter of time before you can teach yourself another one as well.
It's very cool. I guess after a year of studying and getting through to second year comfortably, you're almost assessing your capability and you're like, I've got more capacity. And that's something that comes up for me all the time. I do a solo podcast every 10 episodes and the questions are always around, like, how do you do so much? How do you have your job and your podcast and your sales coaching and your training and your social life? And I'm like, well, I feel like I can. Like, I've got it in the tank in terms of the energy that I've got and the time that I've got and how I allocate it. And that was why it was really interesting for us to chat, because is that one of the early moments when you actually realised that you are somebody that is, I mean, sounds cheesy, but like a really high performer that's capable of doing far more than just one thing? Yeah,
but I also think like that high performer thing, I think that's something everybody has, and they just need to find it. They just need to apply themselves to it. And again, it's like, here's a good analogy. You're not going to go from never running to running a marathon in one day, right? I didn't just start doing everything I'm doing just now. It was a gradual progress. I went to Glasgow Uni, I started learning Spanish, and then I slowly started increasing as my capabilities increased as well. So you can't just start overnight. It's something that takes years to build up to. And like you said, people ask how you're able to handle so much stuff going on at one time. It's like, well, it took me years to get to this point as well. Yeah. And if you look at it in that way, you're not going to be able to do this in a week's time. It's going to take 3, 4, 5 years to be able to get there. But just don't give up. Have a plan in place. Look at it regularly and just keep going.
How detailed and how regimented was your routine when you're going through university, you're learning a language, you're trying to be a sprint champion? How disciplined you have to be?
Extremely. I think I drunk once or twice during my full 4 years at Glasgow Uni. So it shows you how disciplined I was in terms of not going out all the time and drinking.
You would be a mature student as well, which is a different environment.
Yeah, so it's maybe slightly easier. You're not getting pulled into the 18-year-olds that are going out every night of the week to drink. But I would wake up 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock every morning. I'll get my studying done really early. I would get my training done. I'd look after my dad, and then I would do my lectures online, and I'd go to the gym again in the night. I'd do a bit of Spanish at night time, and I just made sure every minute of the day I was doing something that was going to make me progress.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at things. Like, does this progress me towards this ideal version of Steven, who's standing there with the degree and who's standing there able to speak Spanish and who's maybe pursued himself physically and has still showed up as, most importantly, a carer for dad?
Yeah, I think it's just waking up and thinking, what am I going to do today that's going to get me to my goals tomorrow?
Yeah, you know? and again, I think it's great that you've brought up that framework already. Like, have I given this 100%? If I don't, I'm going to regret this. You're
doing yourself a disservice if you don't. Imagine a good mind trick you can do on yourselves. If you put yourself where you are in 30 years' time, right, and look back, you're going to be happy with what you're doing today in 30 years. And if the answer's no, then change. Do what will make you happy, you know. I think it was Joe Rogan that says, like, play your part in your own movie. And that's really, really a positive way of looking at things. If you were looking at yourself and you were writing your own movie about your life, how would you need to act today to make that movie a success? Well, just do that.
That is why we're so fortunate, in my opinion, for the content we've got access to now, because I think it gives us a chance to learn these frameworks, these stupid little questions we can ask ourselves, that gives us a chance to reset and reframe. And the more often we check in with ourselves, the more likely we are to stay on the right course, I guess.
Yeah, on track. I think checking in with yourself is important. You need to do that regularly, or you can go 6 months before you realise you're going the wrong way. You know,
you're so busy though. I wonder, how do you build in time to check in?
Make sure before I go to bed, 20 minutes before I go to my bed, I'm just thinking, how did the day go? What mistakes did I make? How can I improve?
Is that formal or just in your head?
That's just in my head. I'm doing it. I'm not writing it down. I have goals wrote down. I've got a book in the house where I've got short, medium and long-term goals wrote down, and periodically I'll go back and I'll look at them for a wee bit of motivation. And sometimes I think, I can't be bothered getting up. I've got so much studying to do. I can't be bothered doing that. I think I'll go and look at why I'm doing that. And then when you see physically wrote down why it is you're doing that, it gives me the motivation.
What are some of those things you've written down?
To be a neurologist, to be a doctor, to be successful, to give 100%. The big one, the first one, is just give 100%, you know. And if I look at that and think, am I giving 100% just now? No, so I better go and do that just now.
I really respect that, and I do think I would call that like an anchor.
Yeah.
It brings you back.
Yeah.
And it's something that sits there constantly. And some people would say like an anchor's a negative thing, like it's holding you back, but that's keeping you anchored and grounded in the right ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's easy. Everybody can do it. Just get a bit of paper and just write down what you want to do with your life. Write down where you want to be next week, 5 years, 10 years time. Write down the steps that you want to take to be able to achieve those goals.
Something that didn't come up in the headline, Dafty to Doctor, was the fact that becoming a doctor was a plan B for the Royal Marines.
Yeah, so the plan was to go to the Royal Marines, leave Glasgow Uni, go to the Royal Marines, and then come back to medical school. So I went to my Royal Marines after Glasgow Uni, but during Royal Marines training, I had an unfortunate incident. We were out on exercise where I fell over and I broke my leg. I shattered my kneecap again, so I was medically discharged. But that's something I always believe, if you start something, you should finish it. And that's something I will go back and finish at some point, you know. And people have always said to me, but you got medical discharge, they're not going to want you, etc., etc. And I always say to them, and I think it's applicable for everybody, and not if you're applying for the Royal Marines, if you're applying for any job in life, right? What CV would that employer be silly to reject, right? Think of the CV that they would look at and think, we can't say no to this person, right? Think of that CV. Now work backwards until you've got that CV. So what I'm doing just now is I'm making sure by the time I reapply for the Royal Marines, my CV is going to be that impressive for them that they can't possibly say no to me. So anybody else watching this is thinking in a similar situation, I want A, B or C job, or think, what CV do you need to give to that employer that they can't say no to you? And then just work until you've got that CV.
I think, again, just a great framework to have, and that's like the whole like become undeniable.
Yeah, it's exactly that, yeah.
Because if, like you say, if you've got another 2 years of medical school, how can I use the time where I'm not studying or not showing up in my other duties and requirements to move me closer to the kind of guy that's going to be a Royal Marine?
Yeah.
And again, that's another really nice framework. You can look back at how you spent your Monday to Sunday last week and think, yes, I moved towards this. Yes, I moved towards that. That day was a bit off. I could do that better.
How can I fix it? And then sometimes as well, on the flip side of that, some days you've done too much. Sometimes you need to rest. Sometimes you need to take that Sunday off. And
I think your personality probably leans into maybe heading towards too much.
And overtraining a lot of the times. I think what I've got better with over the last couple of years is saying to myself, I think I've done too much. Especially when it comes to physical training. If you overtrain, you're not getting the benefits. You're going to actually negatively affect your performance, right? That same stuff happens psychologically when you're studying. Sometimes you get to the point where you've been on the laptop for so many hours, you're not taking any more of that information in. And it makes no sense to spend another 2 hours looking at the laptop. Shut it over, chill out, take the night off and come back to it tomorrow. And that's a skill that I've had to develop over the last couple of years.
That's discipline too.
Exactly, it is. It's discipline to say to yourself, do you know what, I'm actually just going to shut everything off for tonight and I'll come back to it tomorrow.
You're learning French just now, is that right?
I'm learning French using Spanish.
What's the methodology there?
I've always wanted to be a polyglot, so once I learned Spanish, I realised that, you know what, I can learn languages, and I think everybody can. Again, much I say to people when they say, oh, I don't think I've got time to do that, I don't think I'm smart enough to learn another language, and I say to everybody, if you speak one language, you can learn another one. You just need to be disciplined with it, and you need to bring it into your life and make it a part of your life. And people say, but I'm so busy, I've got my job, and then I'm looking after the kids. Legitimate problems, right? But find ways in your day that you can start to study. So how do you get to your work? Or I get the bus 30 minutes and then I get the bus back. Okay, so there's an hour you could be listening to the podcast. Oh, I never really thought of that. Do you work out? I go to the gym maybe 7 o'clock to 8:30. And what are you listening to in the gym? Oh, maybe a podcast. So you could listen to a Spanish podcast while you're in the gym, or like me, you want to listen to music and get yourself in the zone. Do you like music? Who doesn't like music? Start listening to music in Spanish. You know, there is always ways around the problems that you've got if you think about them. Very few people are so busy where they can't find an extra 30 minutes or an hour a day to work on if they wanted to learn the language, for example.
Yeah, I think that's great examples, and it's small changes within the time that we've got allocated towards us that can compound over time to lead to where we want to get to.
Take that 20 minutes a day over 5 years, you know. Like you said, it compounds quickly.
Whereas some of these may be in a bit more of a rush and they're thinking, I don't have time to do an all-intensive Spanish course. And you're thinking, neither do I.
Neither do I. And you don't have to. And it's like, I've not got the money to do it either. I was like, I've never spent a penny learning French or Spanish. I've never went to a class. I've done it all off my own back. There's resources online that you can now do. We can learn the language.
So listen to Spanish podcasts, listen to Spanish music. Was two of your routes.
Yeah.
What else do you swear by?
Watching series and Netflix. So one of the good things about Netflix is so much content. Even if you're watching something in English, you can put Spanish subtitles on, so at least you're learning how to read in Spanish at the same time as well. There's plenty of apps nowadays.
And that's your leisure time as well, technically, isn't it? I'm watching Netflix, but I'm also levelling up.
So you're killing 3 birds with one stone. So if you want to switch off at the end of the day, what do you like doing? Going home and watching a series. Well, just go home and watch that series in French or in Spanish, you know?
You're so practical, I love it. That's,
it's just being very good with your time, you know, being very good with time management.
Yeah, I've got so much respect for that as well. What's the process for learning French from Spanish?
It's actually a lot easier because they're both Romance languages, so there's a lot of similarities. So I'm learning French through a Spanish teacher online who only speaks French and Spanish, if that makes sense. So I thought, I'm never going to forget English, touch wood, right? So if I'm going to learn French, why would I not strengthen my Spanish at the same time? So I would just use Spanish to learn French. So the woman teaches me French in Spanish, or when I'm learning French on my phone, it's in Spanish.
It's so impressive. And one of the things that made me laugh the most when I first got to know your story was how you would write lecture notes on one side of the paper in one language, and on the other side in another language.
Aye, so I would write on my... I don't take notes anymore. Maybe we'll go on to that as well, why I don't. But during my time at Glasgow Uni, when I was taking notes on the left-hand side of the page, I taught myself to write with my left hand. I would write the notes in English, and with my right hand, I would write on the right-hand side of the page and in Spanish. So if you looked at my notes from Glasgow, you'd be like, this looks like 2 different people in 2 different languages.
It's 2 different hands.
2 different handwritings as well. Yeah.
From a skill perspective, how quickly were you able to write well with the other hand anyway?
Took a bit of time, and I was brushing my teeth with my left hand as well, and you kind of feel like
you cut your gums a few times.
You feel like a 3-year-old baby just getting used to using this hand again. It did take a bit of time, and it was.
And there's still some damage with that hand from the incident?
There is still some damage, but nothing that affects my ability to write, thankfully. But it does take a bit of time. You feel silly at first. You're brushing your teeth like a 3-year-old, you know, but again, you're developing new neurological pathways in your brain, you're developing new skills in that as well, and now you're completely ambidextrous with both hands. Does
that element of challenge feel like something you need to have?
Absolutely. Yeah, challenge to wake yourself up and goals as well. Like I think I'm pretty goal orientated. I think most people are, aren't they? It's like, why are you waking up today? What's the reason you're waking up? For me, it's like, what is the challenge today? Or what can I do? And what's the challenge for the next 6 months that I need to get up early today to be able to achieve?
Do you consider yourself restless at all?
In what sense?
Do you you mentioned like sometimes you tend towards overtraining. I'm completely the same. Are there times where you just feel like you need to be doing something?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think I can. I know I can't sit down at the end of a night and enjoy watching an hour of a series on Netflix if I haven't done what I said I was going to do during the day. If I haven't went to work, if I haven't went to uni, if I haven't done my classes, if I hadn't done everything I had to do, I can't sit at peace on the couch and chill out.
Where do you think that comes from?
I think making mistakes when I was younger and catching up, or what I perceive as catching up on the mistakes and what I missed out on when I was younger. I think that's one of the biggest reasons behind it.
Yeah, it's like making up for lost time,
Mm-hmm.
Or time that was not spent on the level of purpose that you have now.
Yeah, time that was spent not working on the goals that I currently have.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think we've all got different things that drive us and make us go, and I think you are incredibly driven, otherwise you wouldn't show up for yourself in the way that you do. But sometimes it's hard to think like, why am I doing this?
Yeah, I think that's why you need to have a purpose in your goals as well. I think if you're doing stuff like I am that you enjoy, it's a lot easier. Whereas if I had to do everything I was doing just now and I hated every single one of them, I don't think I'd be able to do it. I think having that intrinsic motivation to do what you're doing makes a massive difference.
I need to find out who this quote's from because I say it quite often, but the tools will be heavy, but they'll feel light in your hands.
Yeah.
So, for example, you might say to somebody, act out my day or my week with me, and there'll be times where they're hating it and really struggling and not feeling like it's something they're enjoying doing. Whereas for you, there'll be elements that the work is like play because it's in alignment with your purpose. It's in alignment with a skill set that you want to do and maybe have an element of positive feedback loop from. Whereas if somebody maybe starts to learn a language and they're not really intrinsically motivated to do it, then they're going to drag their feet through it. They're going to dislike it. They're going to feel tired by it. Like there's an exercise that I learned from an American guest I had on called Sahil Bloom. It's called an energy calculator. And you colour the tasks that during the day that give you energy green, ones that are just standard, amber, and then the ones that drain you, red.
Yeah.
So for example, for me during like my sales role, if I'm doing like filling in the CRM system with my notes from the last 3 weeks of meetings, that's red, boring, not enjoying it at all. But when I'm doing my calls or my presentations or I'm doing my pitches, green. I could do those all day long, whereas somebody else might colour that red.
Yeah.
And they might love the data and the assessing what stock got ordered last week and in what quantities and when it goes out. They like the guy that works in product or stock is going to be thriving off that, whereas the guy like me that works in sales and presentations is going to be like, keep that away from me. So I think it's interesting when people need to understand the way your diary's filled out is very unique to Steven Beattie, and you've done really well to find the things that fill up your cup.
Yeah, what's pleasure for me might be punishment for you, you know, and having that...
Well explained, more succinctly than I managed.
And I think having that intrinsic motivation is, again, it's everything. It's so much easier. Like the saying, if you find a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life, you know, and I feel what I'm doing. Everything I'm doing just now is stuff that I love doing and enjoy doing, so it doesn't seem like I'm stressing myself out about getting this stuff done. It's stuff that I would want to be doing anyway. And here's a good one that I always say to people about finding what you actually love, right? Have this mind that if you won the lottery tomorrow, what stuff would you still do? These are the stuff that you would still do if you won the lottery tomorrow. That's the stuff that you love. And if you can, like I'm doing, find a way to turn that into a job, then you're winning. Yeah.
Did you find that with personal training as well? Did you love that?
Oh, massively. Yeah. Anything to do with fitness was something I was always sort of interested in, and watching people change and helping people as well. Same in medicine as well, and personal training. They're similar in the sense that you're helping somebody physically, even a lot of the time psychologically as well.
Yeah, well, people joke like, oh, my personal trainer's like my therapist. Yeah. And it's very often the case. People share their deepest, darkest secrets when they're feeling vulnerable and they're training with somebody and they're seeing that progress. They're maybe able to tell them something about what's going on outside of that.
Yeah, it's a privilege as well that somebody's able to open up about their darkest secrets with you as well. You know, you need to take that very seriously. That somebody's maybe telling you something that they've never spoke out. And I've had that as a personal trainer. I've had people say to me that they're having a really difficult time in their life and they've maybe not shared that with their wife, their family, or anybody else, and they've shared it with you. They've trusted you enough to give you that responsibility, and that's something that you have to take very seriously as well.
Yeah, and it's clearly something that somebody like yourself gets something from, like it feels right and good and you're capable of handling it.
Yeah, you always feel so much better helping people than you do for anything else, you know. I think like the charity stuff and that is like some of the best feelings that you'll get is helping at somebody else, not like financial rewards and that, they're all well and good, but the best thing that I get is just watching other people improve and helping somebody that was maybe in a very difficult situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Where on earth does MMA come into all this?
MMA came into it from, you know, I'd done the Development Like David podcast. You know, David's very good at finding people who think would have similar interests and go on well.
He's a brilliant connector, and we've become really close over the last few years in terms of introducing each other to like-minded people that can help and support, whether that's been guests for the podcast or whether that's just been friendship outside it. So I know he's done that really well for you.
Yeah, so he said to me, I've met another guy at the gym, Neurologist gym in Glasgow, called David Galbraith. He's an ex-professional fighter. I think these guys would get on well. You seem to have a very similar personality. He said, do you want to meet up? I said, I go for it. So I went and met David and David, the two Davids together, and we got on really well. He said to me, why don't you come along to the gym at New Life and check it out? Went there, fell in love with it. I was like, do you know what? I feel like this is something I was really supposed to be doing. And I've been there for just over almost a year now with David at New Life Gym. Aye.
How important has that outlet been for you?
Massive. You know, it's something I never thought just over a year ago that I would even be involved in. And then fast forward a year, we're having quite a lot of success early on. Yeah, yeah, we're making pretty quick progress, and I think that's a testament to the level of coaching and training partners that you get at New Life Gym. The environment over there is really conducive to improvement. Everybody's out there to help everybody as well. It's like grassroots gym. Everybody's in there came from the very first day to where they are just now. So it's massive for me.
Had you experience in combat sports before?
Never, no experience in combat sports at all. I'd hit the bag every now and again in the gym. Like I think a lot of people.
I think I've seen a video of you throwing some big shots.
So I would hit the bag and all that, but there's a big difference between hitting a bag that doesn't hit you back and then having somebody that's going to hit you back. So that was my first experience with combat sport. And then, yeah, I said to David, when's the next competitions? I just got really involved with it. I was like, I really want to do this. And I'd done a competition after 2 months in December last year as well. And then it just kind of, everything snowballed from there.
How does the adrenaline of going into the ring or the arena compare to those younger childhood experiences where you were in these crazy fight situations and you almost had no regards for your safety?
I think there's a few differences, and probably the big one being I'm not drunk. I'm choosing to do this as well. It's in a controlled environment, you know. I'm the one that signed myself up for this, whereas back in the day it's like that's something that happened on a spur of a moment on a Saturday or a Friday night. But the adrenaline and the buzz you get from it's unbelievable. When I go before a competition or before a fight, that feeling you have in the pit of your stomach, that nerves you have is it's addictive.
Is there any other outlet you've got to get that?
No,
Nothing compares.
No, not at all. Not maybe when I graduate as a doctor and I'm working with life and death scenarios, potentially that will have the same effect. But no, right now nothing compares to that. The feeling that you get before you go out for a fight.
Is that something you're excited to have back in your life?
I can't wait. Yeah, we just had 2 fights in the last 2 weeks, and that was unbelievable. And I messaged David on the Monday after the fight, asking him when can I get back out and do that again.
Well,
you know?
I met David at the gym at David Lloyd on maybe Monday or Tuesday, and he said Steven was out running.
Yeah, I went out for a 5 mile
straight
run.
away because I think you text him something like, I need to improve my cardio.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm out running.
Yeah.
And I just laughed. We'd not met each other, but we've messaged back and forth to get a really good sense of each other. And obviously I've learnt a lot from you through David McIntosh. I knew the kind of character you were, and I just smiled because that's in terms of if your identity is as somebody that continually wants to give 100%, then of course your actions are going to align with somebody who does that. And guess what? That's somebody that starts running again to try and improve the so-called weakness.
Aye, exactly that. I think one of the big problems we had in that fight, obviously we took it on really short notice, but I thought if my condition was a bit better, we would have done a bit better. So the first thing I'd done on the Sunday was went out for a 5 mile run and went to the gym.
What are your goals within MMA?
So currently I'm on the pro fight pathway at New Life Gym. So essentially we're all training like professional athletes with the goal to turn pro. So the goal for me is to continue training with David, everybody else at New Life, continue to progress. We're making very quick progression recently. Continue to do that, turn pro, and like we do with everything else, get as far as I possibly can with it. What
do you think needs to happen for you to achieve the things that you want in MMA?
I think I just need to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm surrounded with the right people. Like everybody I can see in at New Life Gym, from my wrestling coaches to my striking coaches to my training partners. Like I said, the progress that we've made in 12 months to fight for a title last week is a testament to them, you know. So if I can continue doing what I've been doing the last year, who knows, we'll be in another year. Yeah, something that David said to me that really struck a chord was, this isn't normal. And not many things in the Steven Beattie story are that normal. Like you're living a very extraordinary life. To go from, I think it was the first fight that you had recently, or second, that would be your second fight, and you won, and then to have a title shot the week after. That's not a thing. No. There's not that many people you can be like, oh, Jamie from the gym's done that before, or maybe even somebody from another local club. You can see the pathway they've done. That's different. Like, does that feel important to you to be doing something different, to be breaking new ground? Yeah, it's very important, but obviously there's a massive element of luck to that as well. Okay. The title shot was initially supposed to be for my training partner, Todd, but unfortunately he got injured. So the stars aligned. I was in camp, I just finished a fight. My training partner got injured. Would I step in on a week's notice to take his title shot? So yeah, there's obviously a great degree of luck that I managed to get that title shot on a week's notice. Yeah, but I never thought if you asked me a year ago that I would be where I am just now. I'd never have believed you. So that's why I'm so excited. If I can keep doing what I'm doing, where we're going to be in 1 year's time. Yeah, and I guess
I don't want to say losses, but it's not often you get setbacks. But when you do, for example, the Royal Marines being medically discharged, you went and did medicine, you got a title fight, but you lost it despite the fact that you dominated the first 3 rounds.
Yeah.
You don't seem to let the speed bumps deter you in the way that if I think about 15, 16-year-old Steven who maybe got injured and then ended up delving back into the kind of the poorer elements of his life and the more challenging elements of life. I don't see that being possible for you now anytime you hit a roadblock.
No, I don't even consider it a roadblock. I think it's like a springboard for me, defeats, you know. I think they're the biggest motivators for me. I remember in college, I failed my first ever exam. It was a chemistry exam in college, and I'm thinking, if I can't even pass an exam in college on chemistry, how am I going to go to uni and become a doctor? But after that exam, the failure that I felt from that, then I've decided, you know, I'm just going to study as much as I possibly can so that will never happen again. And then 8 years of uni since, I've never failed an exam, you know. And it's these losses, failures, however you want to describe them, that if you look at them a certain way, they can be the biggest motivators for you. Like I said, on that Sunday, the first thing I done was when I went out to run. I was never more motivated to go back and start fighting. Like I said, I text David straight away saying, when can I do this again? I really wanted to get back in there and make amends. And it's the way you look at your losses, the way you look at your failures in life. It doesn't have to be in competition. It can be in professional capacity or personal capacity as well. If you look at them the correct way, they'll be the biggest source of inspiration and that biggest fire that will light inside you that you can possibly have.
I really like the fact that after any springboard or challenge or loss, you straight away look for a practical solution on how to rectify it. Failed the exam, study more next time. Felt my cardio wasn't quite where it needed to be. Guess what? I'm going running to try and improve my engine so that I'm there. And I'm sure there's so many other examples to do that. I think many people sit within the loss or the challenge for too long and don't think about what's the immediate first step that I can do. The first ever solo podcast I did was talking about I'd moved to a company. I'd been there for 12 weeks. An American hedge fund bought the company, made the entire UK operation redundant. We were in this Glasgow office. There's 20 people. We walked outside. 19 of them went to the pub, like to have a drink. They get given the company credit card to go and spend it with. I got straight on the phone to the recruiter that placed me at that company, and I was like, I'm ending my CV, I'm sending it to you. And so many of my friends were like, that's bizarre. But I was like, I needed to find something within the locus of my control that I could take action on so I could feel like I can have agency.
Yeah.
And I think of many of the people that I look up to that I've interviewed in the podcast or become good friends with, they are action orientated to get away from the worst possible situation and move towards some sort of better outcome. What can we do now that will get us away from this?
I think psychologically it helps you as well. You can just sit for days at a time just thinking about your loss or your failure, you know, or you can do something. Agency is the biggest one. What can I do just now that's within my control?
It's empowerment. Yeah,
exactly. This is something I can actually do physically just now. It's going to make me feel a bit better. I'm going to be able to handle this a bit better because I'm able to do A, B or C. And again, it sets you up so when that situation happens again in the future, you're in a better position where you're less likely to fail again.
How predisposed are you to be good at MMA? Like your strength and conditions, obviously fantastic. Your mindset's really strong. What are the things that you think make you somebody that could be really successful in this field?
I think that's something you'd probably have to ask my coaches, you know. I'm still relatively new to this. I've been in just about a year, so the elements that you need to be a very good MMA fighter, like speaking from not much experience.
Relative experience.
Yeah, exactly. I think the mindset's a big one as well, isn't it? A degree of athletic ability, I suppose, is important as well. And I think one of the ones is luck, staying injury free as well. You know, how many people have got all the talent in the world, but because they've got injured, they were never able to express that. So avoiding injuries, I think, is a massive one.
Yeah, I know your strength and conditioning is mad because I've seen a video of you benching. Is it 167 and a half kilos?
167 and a half.
At 74 kilos.
74 kilos, aye.
And I fluctuate between about 71 and 75 depending on how much training I'm doing in terms of like and how much eating I'm doing and how much running I maybe do or how much maybe boxing training I do.
Yeah.
I've never gone near any weights like that, and I consider myself to be somebody that's strong for my body weight. Yeah. That's incredible feat of strength.
Yeah, it was. At the time, it was. I was very, very happy with that lift.
How focused are you on that sort of stuff alongside your training now? Like, what's the focus?
Nowhere near as much. You can't. When I was doing that, I was benching 3 or 4 times a week. I wasn't doing any endurance stuff at all. And it's a balance, as you know yourself. The more you start doing strength, you take away a few endurance. And
keep the goal the goal.
Exactly. So I'm not even, that doesn't bother me at all. I don't focus on it. I don't go in and do 1 rep maxes anymore. I don't care what my numbers are on gym. My strength stuff in the gym is strength maintenance and just conditioning, injury prevention. I don't worry about numbers.
You're just making yourself as physically ready as possible for the main thing, which is in the arena.
Exactly. And there's a point of diminishing returns as well. If you can bench 160, and what's the difference between 160 and 107? Relatively in a fight, not much. But the effort I would need to put in to get that extra
to eke out the 20%.
Exactly, it's too much. It doesn't make sense. Like if I can bench 150 or 170, it's all the same. It's like a plank. If you can do a plank for 3 minutes or 30, who cares? You know, you've got good core stability to do it for 3 minutes. It doesn't matter if you can do it for 30, and the time you need to invest to get it up to 30 just doesn't make any logical sense.
Yeah. What does a day in the life look like now then, balancing the different things that you've got? So top priorities, just from my understanding, medical degree, MMA career.
Yep.
What else stands out?
Learning languages, looking after my dad, working as a PT still as well. So I'm getting up early, give my dad his medication, driving about an hour and a bit to Dundee Uni when I have lectures. I'll get my lectures done and then I'll drive from Dundee to Glasgow. I'll get my MMA training done, then I'll drive another hour and a bit back home, and that takes up the vast majority of my day.
What are you spending your time in the car doing?
Listening to Spanish podcasts about
How did I know?
Exactly, or French. It's not dead time, you know. I'm making the
I call it bundling.
Aye.
A lot of my friends are like, how do you manage this? And I'm like, well, you know that walk I go every morning before I log on my laptop if I'm working from home? I'm listening to an upcoming podcast guest, or I'm listening to a sales trainer to think about how I maybe position a new pitch that I've got coming up. I'm using the time on my terms rather than just filling it with
dead space.
Yeah, dead space. And I think we're wired similarly in that regard.
And I think it's another thing that everybody can do. You know, there's no secret here. It's like you just put a podcast in and you listen, and eventually you'll get more and more information, you'll get smarter, you'll get more knowledge about something as well. And those 3.5 hours, 4 hours driving every day in the car, people think, I don't know if I could do that. But if you say to them, it meant that you didn't have to spend the same amount of hours in the library that the rest of my classmates are doing, you know, and at the end of that degree, you'd be able to speak another language. I think it's a very fair, I think those 4 hours, if you think you would look at it and think, do you know what, that was actually worth it. 4 hours every day driving, but at the end of it, you're going to get the ability to speak another language, or you're going to be spending less time in the library, or you can go home after your lectures wherein everybody else is going in the library for 3 or 4 hours.
That's something that you would recommend people add to their life. And I see this a lot with like morning routines or productivity routines. People are always saying like, add this or add journaling or add cold water. I'm a big believer in sometimes we have to take things away. Is there anything that you take out of your life that you think other people should maybe consider as well?
Take it out of my life? I'm not sure if I've took anything out. Maybe alcohol to a certain extent. Nah, not recently.
That's a big one for a lot of people. Mindless social media is another.
That's when it gets you sometimes. I think there's a few tricks you can do with social media. If you think I'm going to be hijacked with the phone anyway, I may as well make use of it. So what I've done with Twitter is I made a Twitter account where I'm only following people in French or in Spanish. So I'm still getting...
I knew there was going to be good advice here. I'm ready for it.
So I'm still getting the dopamine release of scrolling through my phone. But as I scroll through my phone, I'm also learning at the same time. I'm not just looking through what my pal had for his dinner.
Not all procrastination is created equal.
Exactly. Yeah, and if you can procrastinate in a way that you're also benefiting yourself, then why not? You're still getting, like I said, the dopamine release of scrolling through your phone, but you're learning at the same time.
I think you're the only person that was ever going to tell me something like that, and I absolutely love that bit of advice as well. Kind of one final question for you, apart from asking where people can get involved with everything you're up to. What would need to happen in the next 5 years by the time you turn 40 for you to feel like it's been a success? Become
a professional MMA fighter, become a doctor, be accepted onto the specialisation programme to be a neurologist, and to be a polyglot in the next 5 years. That would be my definition of success.
I can't see anything stopping you, and even if something does come up, it might delay it by 6 months, a year, 2 years or something like that, but I think you're just an unstoppable force that's got so much in alignment as well, and I'm really excited to see it all happen as well.
Thank you.
Stephen, I've had a fantastic time. I'm sure the listeners have enjoyed the conversation as well. Where should they head towards to continue the conversation with you?
On Instagram. I'm Steven Beattie Glasgow on Instagram.
That'll be linked in the show notes. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you to the listener. I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.